If I can just perhaps formally start the webinar by welcoming everybody once again. Thanks for coming back and joining us for a second time. Hopefully this will be the second of many, and you all enjoyed the last presentation that Brenda did. Same format tonight, except we've got a new presenter, and Roz will introduce herself shortly. You got the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We've had a few questions that have come in advance of the webinar, and Roz has had those, and she'll deal with those during her presentation. But if you do wish to ask another question, by all means use that, and we'll pick it up at the end of the webinar or the end of the presentation. Okay, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself, Roz, and take it away.
Hello everyone, if you just bear with me whilst I try to start a PowerPoint presentation. There we go, is this working? Can everyone, Rhodes, you'll be able to tell me, can you see this?
It is, you can raise hands, but I can certainly see it, and I hope everybody else.
Super, I can't believe that worked quite as easily as I was expecting, so thanks everyone for tuning in today. So I'm Roz Boynton, and I'm an associate solicitor at Motorcycle Law Scotland, and we are the only motorcycling specific law firm in Scotland, and we're specialist personal injury solicitors representing motorcyclists in their civil law rights where an injury has been suffered. So I'm based up in the Aberdeen office, and you've already seen Rod, who's my technical backup for any hitches, so no doubt he'll shout if anything goes terribly wrong from this end. Normally we do these presentations in person because we think it's important to be able to get out and meet everyone. But the pandemic's put an end to that, so I'm coming to you in your home, directly from my home. I was saying just before, so apologies if there's any noise in the background. My neighbours have decided to start angle grinding their sheds to pieces at 6 o'clock in the evening, and my cat is at the door screaming that it's dinner time. It's already been dinner time, she's definitely been fed. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about road surface defects and some of the cases that we've done before, and just explain a wee bit more about the types of cases that we often see and how we go about pursuing them. So we will have the opportunity for question and answers. If you move your mouse about on the screen or tap your screen, you should see the Q&A function. If I don't cover it already, then I will hopefully come to your question at the end. Just to remind you again that your microphones and your video is muted, so I can't see you, so you could be sitting in your pajamas, nice and comfy. I don't mind. So as I say, today's webinar session is about road surface defects, and whilst the majority of our cases do involve collisions between road users, we do regularly pursue cases involving motorcyclists where they've suffered injury due to a road surface problem. And these are very much the more complex cases that we deal with. And it's helpful for us just to be able to explain to you about why they're difficult, and the information that we need in order to pursue them. And as I say, some cases that I've dealt with personally. So before I dive in, I'll go over just a little bit of the background of how we fit in within the law that applies. So we're a firm of lawyers, but we're civil lawyers. And at its most basic, civil law is the law between persons. So it's disputes between people, but we're personal injury civil lawyers. So we're involved in proving negligence or breach of duty on the part of another person with the aim of securing damages or compensation for our clients for their injuries and losses. So it's a distinct area of law to criminal law, which you'll see that the police or the procurator fiscal might become involved in, where they're seeking to secure criminal convictions. Now, in many times there's an overlap where there's been a motorcycle incident. Perhaps there is, a criminal aspect to the case, particularly if it's been a collision between vehicles. There can be a criminal aspect as well as the civil claim that we would deal with. But we are involved in the civil aspect. So the starting point is the duty of care for civil claims. So in order to prove negligence, we have to be able to show that there's a duty of care. And if we think about sort of collisions, that's quite easy because all road users owe a duty of care to each other. It's a common law duty to exercise reasonable care and not cause harm to other people on the roads. But it's a separate duty of care, and it's a duty of care owed by roads authorities when we're looking at road defects. We have to be able to prove on the balance of probabilities, which is the standard of proof for civil cases, that there was firstly a duty of care owed, that duty of care was breached, and that negligence, that breach has caused the injury. So for cases involving road surface defects, the starting point is known as the Rhodes Scotland Act. And that's the act that says that either the act that says that the roads authority shall manage and maintain the roads in their area. So for local roads, that's the local authority or the council. They are obliged, they shall manage and maintain the roads in their area. For trunk roads, and this is a map of the trunk road network throughout Scotland, it's about 2,000 miles of roads, motorways connecting sort of cities and towns and airports and ports. But for these trunk roads, these are not managed and maintained by the local authority. They're not managed and maintained by the council, but by Transport Scotland on behalf of the Secretary of State. And they have the duty to manage and maintain the trunk road network. In reality, Transport Scotland actually contract this out to various different companies. Most of the network's actually covered by Bear Scotland, which you might have heard of. Another large area is covered by AME, and the bypass, the new Aberdeen bypass, is managed by Aberdeen Roads Limited. So it's within Scotland, it's either the council or the Secretary of State or Transport Scotland who are responsible for maintaining roads. So where there are road defects, this can be a serious hazard for road users, but perhaps more so for two-wheeled road users, because motorcyclists are much more vulnerable when they do encounter a road surface defect. They're probably, I would also say, more aware of road surface problems and more aware of how it affects them. And in advance, you'll know riding motorcycles that you are constantly on the lookout for anything on the road surface. And we've got some of the examples of things that we see here. So up here we've got potholes. On this side you'll see surface dressing, which is something that I'm going to be talking quite a lot about today, because I know it's something that is quite a big concern. We've got road reinstatements, diesel on the roads, and I think just everything went wrong here. The road just seems to be falling to pieces on that one. So I'm going to start today with potholes. So for potholes, the Roads Authority are obliged to maintain and manage the roads, and that will include a reasonable inspection regime and responding to reports of road defects and potholes in their area. So the council are obliged to inspect their roads at a reasonable frequency. And reasonable is one of these words that means different things in different circumstances. So it depends on where the road fits into in their hierarchy, and that the more popular routes will be inspected more frequently than the lesser used routes. And the inspection should assess the road surface for defects and identify those defects and make a judgment as to how quickly they ought to be repaired, and that's known as the response time. So once a defect's been identified, they should look at how quickly it should be repaired based on the seriousness of that defect. And in some respects, it's important for the Roads Authority to consider where that defect is within the road surface. I've got here, it was a tweet actually from Cheshire West Council. So it's an English council, but the same applies. And they were doing trying to explain more about how their roads inspection process works. And so they tweeted out that their roads inspector, Darren, here is inspecting the road surface, and he's measuring it. And because he finds it, the defect to be under 50 millimeters, no action needs to be taken. They got quite a lot of stick for this online, actually, because, well, first of all, Darren's pretty much standing in the pothole. So he's not even got his spirit level from one end to the other. And, you know, he maybe should have put his glasses on, because, you know, that's not the full depth of the pothole. So they did get quite a lot of abuse online, I think, for tweeting this out. Oh, good. My mouse has run out of batteries. Ideal. So there was some of these memes going around saying Dart's spirit level says it's fine. He's measuring it fine. The council should identify faults from these inspections, but they should also respond to reports of defects that might come in from the police or the members of public. And the second one's really important, because quite often people will know about a pothole on their patch. They'll be aware of potholes and routes that they use frequently. But if they're able to avoid them, they won't actually go so far as to report it to the council or to Transport Scotland. So I would ask everyone to make an effort, if you are aware of a pothole that's dangerous and, you know, one that you know to avoid, to make an effort to report that to the council or to the Roads Authority, whether that's Transport Scotland or Bear Scotland, if you know who the contractors are. Almost all the councils have online reporting systems, and it's often very easy to drop a pin on a map online. And if you've been able to tune into this Zoom call, then you're more than capable of doing it. And it's worthwhile doing, not just for yourself and, you know, knowing that it will get repaired, but also to protect your other road users. So think about your motorcyclist friend coming behind you, or, you know, a month behind you. The quicker it gets reported, the quicker the council are aware of it, the quicker it should get repaired. And it also helps, God forbid, if somebody else has an accident on it, then we're able to show that the council knew about the accident, about the pothole or the road defect, and should have done something about it before the accident. I do apologise. I'm controlling this using my mouse, which is Bluetooth operated, and it's decided now to run out of batteries. So in terms of pothole cases, it's not enough for us just to show that there was a pothole and that caused the accident. That's the easy bit. Often our client will come to us, they'll say, I hit a pothole, lost control of my motorcycle, this is what happens. And that's very much the starting point for us. From that, what we have to be able to show is that the Roads Authority knew, or ought to have known, about the pothole prior to the accident, and ought to have repaired it. Rod, I think I might have to hand over to you at this stage. I can. Can you not just use your carriage returner on your? Yeah, I might be able to. Who knows? Sorry, 2 seconds. I'm shaking the battery. Things that you don't think to check. There we go. So what we need to do is investigations to work out how long the pothole had been there, how long the council ought to have known about the pothole being there, and when they ought to have repaired it. So some of the investigations that we'll often carry out after our clients come to us saying, he's had an accident, he's involved in this pothole, we need to find out about how long it had been there for, when it should have been picked up by the council, and when they should have done something about it. And that will involve freedom of information requests to see recent inspections, records, freedom of information requests for reports from the public or the police about the road defects, contacting local householders or business owners to see if they had been aware of how long the pothole had been there, requesting copies of the roadworks repairs, and often we instruct highways maintenance experts to review the evidence and provide a view about what a reasonable Roads Authority ought to have done. And all of this is necessary for us to prove a case. So this is a real life case study, case that I dealt with dating back to 2019. So my client Fraser was involved in an accident on this road, and it's the A30 towards Glenfinnan. So Fraser was riding his Yamaha. It was a Yamaha R1, and he's out with his mate who was travelling behind him at the time. Now, Fraser comes to us with no recollection of the accident. His last memory was a couple of miles down the road, and he doesn't, because of his injuries, he doesn't recall the accident at all. But what we were able to find out was what happened from his friend who was traveling behind him and saw the whole thing. So what happens is Fraser is riding his motorcycle, he's riding away from the camera, so in this direction, and he's coming up towards this left-hand bend here. And that's when he encounters this defect in the road. He's setting himself up for the corner, so he's moving more towards the centre of the carriageway, so he can get a better view around this left-hand bend. And he encounters this defect, and it causes his motorcycle to buckaroo around. His feet come off the pegs, he loses control, and he goes on to the other side of the road and collides with this red Corsa here. And goes into the windscreen, over the car, his bike goes up in flames. He's really badly injured and he's rushed off to hospital. Now, this road here is a trunk road, so it's actually maintained by the duties on the Secretary of State, so Transport Scotland, but it's actually maintained by BEAR Scotland, who are contracted by Transport Scotland for the maintenance. So from there, as I say, that's the first part of information that we get. You know, we can find out from Fraser's friend who was travelling with him that this is what happened. He encountered this pothole and that he lost control of his motorcycle. But that's really the very first part of our investigations. We have to go back and look at what actually happened and when they ought to have known about this difficulty. So what we found out through freedom of information requests was that this road was subject to a weekly inspection because it is a trunk road. And there's a van fitted with a camera and a roads inspector inside that goes up and down this road weekly, checking for road defects. Now, the first record that BEAR Scotland have of this defect on the road here is on 10th of April. Now, my client's accident was 3rd of May, so sort of 3 weeks later. And they thought it was a serious defect at that time. And they did a temporary repair and scheduled it for a full repair. So a full and permanent, roads reinstatement repair within 28 days. And all of that was within the code of practice between Transport Scotland and BEAR Scotland. And that was all okay. However, that permanent repair never actually happened prior to our client's accident. And he had an accident within 21 days of the defect first being recorded. So how do we prove that BEAR were to blame? What we did is we got copies of the footage from the camera fitted to the inspection van, and we could see when the van was driving over this area that this pothole was actually back in place back in January 2019. So again, our client's accident's in May. This problem had been there since January, so it'd been there for 5 months prior to or at least 5 months prior to our client's accident. We took statements from the firefighters who attended, and the firefighters who attended had actually said to our client's mate at the time that the pothole had been there for a long time and they knew about it, and it was big enough to actually affect their fire engine as they're driving along that road. There was also a chance encounter in hospital between our client and a bus driver who had also mentioned that he was aware of that pothole for a long time before his accident. And it was enough, again, to he would notice it in his coach when he's driving over it. So this is a significant road defect. So armed with all this evidence, we were able to prove that the road defect had been there since at least January prior to our client's accident in May. And not only a temporary repair, but a full and permanent repair should have been carried out prior to his accident, and the road ought to have been smooth. His accident should never have happened. So we had to raise the case at court, but once we did, we were able to get a settlement for our client. Again, this one was quite interesting because most of the evidence didn't actually come from our client. In fact, hardly any of the evidence came from our client. He didn't know what happened. All he knew was what people told him. Again, his last memory was a couple of miles down the road. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is surface dressing, because I know that that is something that really concerns motorcyclists. It's something that makes people quite angry because it's something that's so dangerous to motorcyclists and probably less so to motorists, but it's really lethal to motorcyclists. So if anyone doesn't know what surface dressing is and hasn't come across it before, first of all, you're very lucky, but I'll explain a wee bit. So it's spraying bitumen, so tar, in a layer across the road and then adding stone chips on top. And it's a cheap and easy way of roads authorities extending the lifespan of a road. What happens as part of the process is that there is a quantity of loose chippings that is left on the road in the first step, and prevailing traffic, so passing traffic, is allowed to sort of bed it in before the road is inspected and swept, and it should be swept a number of times, or inspected at least a number of times afterwards, to ensure that it's safe. And surface dressing is a real problem for motorcyclists. It is a valid way of being the roads being repaired, however, but the problem that we often find is that there's not adequate advance warning in the form of signage to allow road users, particularly motorcyclists, to know in advance what to expect and what's expected of them. So again, this is a case that I have dealt with. And it was to do with an accident that happened back in 2018. And my client was riding this road towards Tomontoul, and he's on his Harley Davidson. And he's on his way to his first meeting with the Harley Davidson group in Tomontoul. Now, he's actually set off too early, and he didn't want to be there billing no mates and not know anyone, sit around early. So he's actually going quite slowly, and he was going around 40 miles an hour. And again, he's traveling away from the photographer here in the photo. And it's not too clear from this photo, but you can see the two lines there is a whole area of surface dressing that had been recently carried out. And there was only this one single sign. Now, he hadn't seen this sign at the time. There was a car coming the opposite direction. He was setting himself up for the bend. There was a single sign. It's half hidden in grass, and he just didn't see it at the time. There was no advance warning. He didn't know what had happened at all. He was traveling round the bend, 40 miles an hour, perfectly safe speed for this type of bend in normal conditions. He loses traction, and all of a sudden he's mounting up on the grassy verge here, and he ends up just about there, suffering serious injuries to his shoulder and to his chest. Now, it's only as he was sitting at the side of the road does he actually realise what's caused him to come off. And he could see that there's a lot of loose chippings on the road. And he can see the back of that single sign. So you can see the back of that sign as he's sitting waiting to be for the ambulance to come. He had to phone an ambulance by himself. But he doesn't recall seeing any other signs. And so far as he can see further down the road whilst he's waiting on the ambulance arriving, there was no other signs that he could see that would have given him advance warning of this road surface dressing that was being carried out. So he was taken by ambulance to Dr. Gray's hospital, and he was diagnosed with suffering a fractured collarbone. He had multiple broken ribs, he had a punctured lung, and he was actually kept in hospital for 6 days because his injuries were so serious. And the first thing that he does when he gets discharged from hospital is he makes his wife drive him out to the scene of the accident, see what had happened, because he wanted to see whether there were signs that he should have seen that he had missed. And when they go back out to the scene and they go out and they take these photographs, and it's exactly as he remembered it. There was only this one single sign right at the start of the surface dressing works and no other signs in advance telling him what to do, what's expected of him. So he approached us at Motorcycle Law Scotland and asked if we could assist. And we know that there's special duties on the Rhodes Authority in order to provide sufficient signage to allow road users to know what they're going to expect and what's expected of them. And those road signs should be well in advance. There should be a roadworks ahead sign, at least 200 metres of notice, and there should be signage repeated throughout the area of surface dressing. Now, when we intimated the claim to, and it's Moray Council here, we're the Roads Authority for the area, Moray Council denied responsibility because they said that there was signage in place, and they provided us a copy with a signage record, which had all the different signs at different distances, all ticked off and signed off with initials, saying that they were all put out. But we knew, because we had taken a statement from David, we had the photographs from David, and we also had information from his wife as well, to say we went out afterwards and there was no signs there. This was the only sign in place. And we knew from the records that the council hadn't been out to the area between the date of his accident and when our client and his wife went out to visit. So it's not as if they collected signs in the meantime. So we were able to say that the signage records were either incorrect. I suspect they were actually manufactured, but they were certainly incorrect at the time. And we're able to raise his case at court. And throughout the case, although the council or the solicitors for the council denied responsibility just a couple of weeks before the court hearing, and we were prepared to go to a full court hearing, the council were able to make an offer in settlement, which we could recommend to our client. So again, although our client was able to tell us that it was road surface dressing, it was these loose chippings on the road that caused him to come off, there was a lot more background information that we needed in order to be able to prove his accident. This was a somewhat similar case that I dealt with, and it's Ian, who's a sort of maintenance engineer for Network Rail, and again he came off in loose chippings, but rather than a full area of surface dressing, it was actually just a very small area of chippings that were applied just at this corner. So it's actually quite a tight uphill corner. So Ian was out on his bike. It's a lovely summer's day, and he's riding round this corner. There was a single sign there, but again, it's hidden in foliage, and he hadn't seen it. He was setting himself up for the bend. It's just not something that he spotted, and he said there was no other signs. So as he's coming up round this corner, he slips off and ends up again in the ferns over there. He hadn't seen the single sign. He was focusing on the bend, and it was only after he'd come off that he realised there was all these chippings on the road. And Ian's friend was actually out on the motorbike as well, and he was travelling in the same direction and just happened to come across them. They weren't out together. And he stopped to see if he was okay, and helped him pick his bike up off the road. And they were able to all look at the road surface and in terms of the signage that was in place, and there was only this one single sign, and it really is right at where the hazard is. So there's not enough advance warning to show motorcyclists where what to do and what's expected of them. And again, it only says skid risk here. It doesn't have a speed plate, which often you'll see 20 miles an hour, which is nobody in cars are going 20 miles an hour, but for motorcycles, if you see sort of loose chippings and 20 miles an hour, pay heed, because it is dangerous. But even if he had seen it, it's not enough time for him to slow down. So Ian approached us at Motorcycle Law Scotland. They asked us to help. We undertook lots of freedom of information requests to the council, and it's Highland Council here. And they said that they're aware of hand, chip and tar works, which were being done at the area, but they didn't keep any formal records of it. So this is roadworks being done on a road, on a bend, on an uphill bend, with no records actually being kept of it. And it's just simply that the foreman remembers. He remembered what had happened, sort of 6 months before or whatever. So first of all, it's shocking in itself that they're not actually keeping, records of roadworks that are being done. But interestingly, well, first of all, what they were doing is called hand, chip and tar, which is kind of sort of rudimentary surface dressing. So it's, sort of out the back, it's literally out the back of a van, somebody's sort of pouring sort of tar, scattering some chips, and often using the wheel of the works van to sort of compress it in. So it's really quite rudimentary, and it's not something that's often used these days, but it's something that's used by Highland Council. But to not keep records of it is shocking enough. So when we intimated the claim to Highland Council, so we told them what has happened, and explained that there was only this one single sign, and they denied responsibility. They said that there was sufficient signage well in advance, and they went out to inspect the area after our client's accident, and the signage was fine. And I actually went up to Inverness, first of all, to see where the accident happened. And it's actually more of a bend than it comes across in this photo, and it is quite uphill. But then I went to go and meet the foreman, who said that he'd gone out, that he'd done the work, and that he'd gone out afterwards, after the report of this accident, to have a look at the signs. And what he said is that when he left the works, so once the works were done, and I think it was the evening before, he had put the sign had been put out, but been put 50 metres in advance of the roadworks. And when he got there, after our client's accident, it was indeed, where it is shown here. And his only conclusion was that somebody must have picked it up and moved it 50 metres. So this is in the middle of the Highlands. And, it's not the fun games that I used to play as a kid anyways, like pick up road signs and move them 50 metres. Nobody's moving a road sign 50 metres. It was just nonsense. And on that basis, and it was just incredible what he was trying to tell us. And I would have quite liked him to try and tell the courts, or to try and convince the courts that the road sign had simply been moved, after they left the roadworks. But after I took the statement from the roads foreman, the other side quite quickly moved to settle the case, and it was 2 weeks before the proof date when we finally received an offer and settlement. So again, in this case, it wasn't just that there was chippings on the roads. There was loose chippings, but there was more to it. We had to look at the information, the planning that was done to this roadworks, none, because there was no records, and the signage that was in place. And this one, again, it's just far too close. There's no advance warning. It says skid risk. You can barely see that it says skid risk, but what chance have you got if it's right there at the hazard? So moving on from surface dressing and other works, the last type of surface problem I'm going to talk about today is diesel spills. Diesel spills, again, a particular hazard for those on two wheels. It's like hitting black ice and there's just no standing a chance. So my client here, again, this is a real life case that I dealt with, was out on his bike with his three mates. He's in Aberdeenshire, he's heading out towards Rhynie. He's approaching this right-hand bend and travelling in this direction away from the camera. And all of a sudden, his bike went from underneath him. So you see, he didn't actually see anything in advance, but you can see quite clearly afterwards, and after he came off, he'd actually broken his wrist. And quite quickly, it was clear to him and his mates, who all stopped to help him and to take photographs. It was diesel on the road that had caused his accident, and that's what caused him to lose traction. Again, it's obvious when you're taking photographs in this sense, but it wasn't obvious to him on approach. Oh, too far. There we go. So as I say, it was clear to them afterwards that there was diesel on the road's surface. And the problem is, without knowing where the diesel had come from and how long it'd been there for, we're in a difficult position to pursue a claim against the council or the Roads Authority, Transport Scotland, unless we can prove that they knew or ought to have known that there was diesel on the road. So if you do become aware of diesel on the road, make sure that you report it, either to the council or to the police non-emergency line on 101. You can let them know, and someone will get sent out to put sand on the road. However, in this case, we're unable to show that the council knew or ought to have known that there was diesel on the road, because we don't know where it came from and we don't know how long it had been there for. But in these cases, we use a different way of getting compensation for our clients, because although we don't know exactly where the where's my mouse? There we go. Although we don't know exactly where the diesel came from, on the balance of probabilities, it must have come from another vehicle. And it's usually from another vehicle overfilling a tank, or not putting the fuel cap on properly, or poor maintenance, or all of the above. But either way, it's to do with negligent acts on the part of a road user. It's come from a vehicle. But the problem is, we don't usually know which vehicle it's come from. The vehicle is long gone, and there's usually no way of tracing it. So in these circumstances, we're able to use a different mechanism for getting compensation for our client, and that's by pursuing a claim to the Motor Insurers Bureau, the MIB. Not the Men in Black, it's the Motor Insurers Bureau. And they're a body formed by statute, but funded by the insurance industry, and they provide compensation to untraced and uninsured drivers. Now, untraced drivers in the normal sense is normally hit and run situations, but we can also use the untraced drivers agreements to help our clients who have been involved in an accident involving a diesel spill, because we know that the diesel must have come, when it's a significant spillage like this, again, in the middle of nowhere, where else does it come from apart from another vehicle? So what we were required to be able to prove to the Motors Insurers Bureau is that was a substantial spillage, and we did this using the photographs. So again, if you're unfortunate enough to be involved in an incident involving diesel, then do take lots of photographs, because they are crucial in being able to show that it is a substantial diesel spill that must have come from an untraced vehicle. And on that basis, we're able to make a successful claim to the Motors Insurers Bureau for our clients' injuries and losses. The other thing to say is, if you are, again, unfortunate enough to be involved in an accident involving a diesel spill, do report the incident to the police as soon as possible, because you don't want something like this to happen to somebody else behind you, but certainly within 14 days in order to make a valid claim to the Motors Insurers Bureau for your case. Just wanted to speak briefly about expert witnesses, and I see Ewan Clayton is asking questions, so thanks, Ewan. Ewan's one of the experts that we do sometimes use to provide evidence, but an expert witness is really important. So often we instruct experts to provide reports on road surface defects and what is expected of a roads authority or of the roads authority in managing and maintaining their roads, or what signage is required. And expert evidence is important because, whilst we are specialists in representing motorcyclists, it's not for me to say, I cannot give evidence in court. It's not for me to say what a council should have done or what a roads authority should have done in the circumstances. We do need expert witnesses, such as Ewan and other experts that we often use, in order to give evidence and opinion about what ought to have been done in the circumstances. And again, just to remind everyone that every case is different. So it's never just another pothole case or just another surface dressing case. Every case involves a huge amount of work and investigation to find out where the case is. And sometimes we don't always know when we start. So often people approach us and tell us they've had an accident involving a road surface defect. And sometimes we have to say, you might have a case, we need to do more investigations. And it's not that we're being pessimistic, it's just that sometimes we don't know until we've done those investigations exactly where the case lies. And it's often quite, well, I don't want to say fun for us, but I quite enjoy picking apart the information, following the threads and trying to work out what the council have done, what they should have done, what they've missed out on doing in order to try and prove the case. Again, just if you're unlucky enough, and I hope you never need to know anything about this, but if you're unlucky enough for something to happen to you, if you need to call the police, make sure that you've noted the police incident reference number from them. If there's any witnesses to the incident, take their details, their phone numbers, because we might need to get in touch with them again. Get photographs from the scene. The more photographs, the better. Particularly in terms of signage, take photographs of where the signage is, what signage there is there, take photographs of the defect, as many photographs as you can. Videos are great as well. I mean, obviously this isn't, if you're being carted off in an ambulance, might not be your first thing to do, but when you can, or if you can ask the police or a mate that's with you to take lots of photographs, then please do get as much information as you can, because it might be some time before you're able to contact us and we can get out to have a look at it. Again, we're always available to provide advice, and we're here for the motorcycling community. If you're not sure whether you have a claim, whether it's something that you need to be asking a lawyer about, or anything, well, not anything, not advice on anything, legal matters, let's keep it to that. But please do get in touch with us. We're happy to chat. We're always happy to chat, particularly because I'm stuck inside and all I've got to speak to is my noisy cat, my husband. So please phone and speak to me and I will chew your ear off. So we're here. If you've got any questions, get in touch, and we're happy to provide a free consultation and answer any questions that you've got. So thanks very much for listening to me. I hope that it's been somewhat helpful. There was so much more I could talk about, but you'll probably all want to get away for your dinner. So we have a Q&A session function, which I think I'll be able to open if I can get my mouse to work, but I'll maybe hand over to Rod quickly.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Roz. That was very interesting, and I've seen quite a lot of these presentations. I've not seen one of those from you, and that was certainly very enlightening. Nice to hear the detail behind some of those cases. Yeah, there's been a few questions come through. There was somebody
I've managed to get them
on.
up on my screen just now. I don't know. Hopefully, not everyone's got them. If
No,
you can't see them, okay.
You can't see those.
No,
So
that's fine. I can certainly answer those. So I'll deal with, if it's okay, the ones that came in advance first. So Neil in Aberdeen, hopefully you're here. He asked, is there a specific size or dimension of pothole before the roads department will repair it? And the answer is yes and no, which is lots of help. So usually it's about 50 millimeters or more deep, but it's an assessment based on the risk. So a lot depends on the location of the defect and the type of traffic, and whether it's turning traffic or it's on a bend. So it's not quite as bright line as that. So there is there's a matrix of assessment of defects. So yes and no is the answer. Is there a duty of care on the local authority to maintain the quality of road signage markings? Yes, there is. It's based on the Rhodes Scotland Act, and it's either the local authority or Transport Scotland for the trunk road network. And you'd also asked a question about anti-skid material. And I think you had said that you found often anti-skid material didn't go far enough around a corner, and you were coming around a corner and running out of skid material. And perhaps that the installation had considered the use by cars, but not necessarily motorcycles. So for anti-skid material on a road, the Roads Authority have the power to install that. And if they do install it, it should not make things more dangerous. And if they do install it, they should maintain it. And I've not actually dealt with a case relating to anti-skid material, but the thing that I often find on the road is that the anti-skid material sort of degrades a lot quicker than the rest of the road surface. So you end up actually with a bumpier surface. But I suppose if you're running out of anti-skid material on a corner, then you are leaving yourself open to criticism that you're perhaps going into the corner a bit hot. But again, sort of answering these questions in the abstract, it's quite difficult. So, every case is different. For a case involving that, we would probably look at getting expert evidence from a highways expert about the design and the installation of the anti-skid material. And there was another one from Mark who was asking just about whether surface dressing was legal, and there was an excess chips. And oh yeah, no, because he said the road surface chippings were so bad he may as well ride on the beach, which I quite liked. So yes, surface dressing is valid. It's a valid method of repair, and it does require, as part of the process, leaving an excess of chippings. But there should be advanced warning signs in place, giving plenty warning to road users about what to do and what's expected of them. And the maximum speed plates are normally 20 miles an hour, and they should not be removed until the road has been adequately swept, and that's often a number of occasions. And it should be inspected as to be safe before those speed plates are removed. So moving on to the questions that we have just now. Have you been involved in cases ever raised as to the surface type used as opposed to actual maintenance defect issue, e.g. tarmac laid that doesn't have enough PSV rating for the road layout type? No, personally, I haven't been involved in a case like that yet. Those types of cases would involve us having to have a look at the or to seek advice from experts really about the road design and the road surface choice as to whether or not that would be suitable for the location. and whether if it was a different type of road surface that would have prevented the accident. So again, that's one that we would be seeking the input from experts on, because they would be better placed to say what is reasonable. David has asked, do you find that the local authorities and councils are sometimes reluctant to release information about known potholes and maintenance regimes, even when an FOI request is submitted? Dave, yes, I find that quite a lot. I find that I'm often having to cross-reference job numbers, works numbers, report numbers to try and find out where the missing information is. And I'm dealing with a case involving a pothole just now that the council are bending over backwards to try and hide information from me. And it's only through sort of cross-referencing all the reference numbers between hundreds of bits of paper that I'm dragging the information out of them. So that's part of our job, and it just involves an awful lot of grunt work. And it's, oh, and I see Ewan's mentioned some of the general pothole websites, such as I think one's called, I think it's Fill My Hole or Fill That Hole, which is not as dirty as it sounds.
Fill that hole, or
Fill that hole, fix my road. There's a number of general websites. I think we'll be able to get them up onto our Facebook afterwards, where you can report a pothole anywhere in the UK. And you just drop a pen and say that's where it is. And that's not only is a report sent directly to the roads authority responsible to let them know, but it's also open to everyone else. So you can go and search which ones have been reported, so that the councils can't hide it. William has asked, do you cover bicycle accident? My patient hit a pothole and came off with serious injuries and lost a tooth. We do. Our other trading name is Cycle Law Scotland. I'm actually a keen cyclist myself, and we deal with lots of injuries involving those types of things. In fact, I'm dealing with one, and it might even be your patient by the sounds of things. There's very, very serious injuries, and he's lost teeth as well. So two wheels are more vulnerable to road surface defect issues. There's no doubt about that. And they do involve similar difficulties in proving these cases, but the roads authorities are responsible to all road users, and that includes the vulnerable road users. I'd probably say motorcyclists are probably more vulnerable because of the speeds that they're traveling at compared to a cyclist, but equally, you know, a cyclist has not got a full face helmet on, and so if there is an issue, they hit a pothole, they go over their handlebars and smash their face. Are the same, Niles asked, are the same standards of inspection, defect, repairs and signage applicable to trunk roads and the local roads? It's every council has their own policy of inspection. It should all go under, and Ewan will no doubt correct me here, but it's the well-maintained highways. But for trunk roads, they tend to be inspected much more frequently. You know, often weekly or sometimes daily inspections. So you would expect, because they are high, trunk roads are carrying more traffic at greater speeds, that they are maintained an awful lot better usually. Do we have, oh, we've got loads more, goodness me.
Yeah, a few more. I think you
scroll down.
Yeah.
Nicola's asked, is it possible that inspectors are not inspecting whilst thinking of motorcyclists and cyclists, so forget to risk more vulnerable road users? I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that they're, you know, looking at things in terms of how a car would deal with that hazard, and you know, often the inspections are done from a van, and it's not done you know, with the vulnerable road users such as motorcyclists and cyclists in mind. I wholeheartedly agree with that. David's asked, any thoughts on bumpy, I think he means bumpy roads at bus stops, and I'm wondering if he means about quite often you see at bus stops, it's you know, where the buses are pulling in, they create sort of divots with it's almost like a wave material, and it's because this heavy vehicle is pulling in, and the torsional forces of sort of steering into a bus stop and steering back out. I think that's what you mean. So that's something, again, that would be a road's surface defect. And again, it's about how long it had been there for, how bad the defect was, what, did it present a hazard, how long it had been there for, and, whether the council ought to have done something about it by then.
Almost one more. Paint on the roads, I think.
So paint on the roads. Craig is asking, what about paint on the roads? Some roads seem to have too much signage painted onto the roads, making them more dangerous. Are the roads authorities liable if something happens due to this, i.e. slip on the paint when raining, as sometimes you can't help but make contact with the paint when there's too much on the road? I'm not sure if you're meaning about the sort of paint on the road itself, or whether there's so much signage that becomes misleading, and that's something we're finding perhaps more in city centres with the sort of spaces for people measures that are being put in. That there's so much going on and so much new measures being put in with sort of installing cycle lanes. It's completely confusing. If anybody lives in Edinburgh, sort of Princess Street, nobody knows what to do there anymore. It's just, it's an absolute disaster zone. So, I mean, the roads should be, safe. And again, if there's, an issue there, it would be something that we'd look to instruct a highways expert is this reasonable? And again, if there's too much, signage and sort of paintings and things on the road, it sometimes can be more confusing than helpful. Okay, I think I've covered all the questions.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing. The only other comment that actually Jeff Glenn made, where he said would it be achievable to have contractors take photographs of a repair site to prove that it was adequately signed as required by the regulations before they leave it? That would ensure proper signs were indeed placed correctly. Well, I think that probably, yes, of course, that management of contractors and overall management would help if that was done.
Yeah, absolutely. But then equally, if the case involving my chap, when they said that they left the sign well in advance, and I would have an argument that one sign was enough, but they said that they left it 50 meters in advance. I suppose if they'd taken a photograph of it, their position was that it had been moved in between that and the accident. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of roads authorities use check sheets, so tick, 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 sign it off. I've put my sign there, tick, tick, tick. And I don't know whether they're manufactured afterwards or somebody's just wanting to go home and having their flask in the back of the van, tick, 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 and get it done. I do sometimes think that they are actually manufactured after the event. But yes, I would be surprised if there wasn't something that they started doing, or they could just start putting signs up. That would be great. That'd be good.
All right, Rose.
There was one more, I think, saw her come in, but I can't find it now.
Rosie's had a question, but I'm going to use that to link into the next presentation next week, actually. So we'll leave it there in terms of the questions. I hope everybody has found that useful, and thank you once again, Roz, both for your presentation.
And I'm sorry for talking for so long. I did warn you that I could talk.
Well, no, I think the testament is
Niall says that he's going back to grinding his shed again.
No, most people are still there, so it can't have been all bad. So yeah, Rosie asked a question about junctions and percentages, I think talking about contributing negligence. Perhaps we can pick that up, Rosie, at the next presentation, which is a week today, next Thursday, when Thomas Mitchell is going to be discussing junctions. And we have quite a number of case studies and also case law in relation to junctions. So that'll be a hot topic. It's probably the most significant area of incidents that we have to deal with are motorcycle collisions at junctions. So hopefully everybody will come back then. If not, you can always see the recording. Indeed, this particular seminar or webinar has been recorded, and it should be up on our website, on our YouTube channel, and on our Facebook pages sometime early tomorrow morning. So thanks everybody once again for joining us, and good night.